So the first bill we're going to take up is House Bill 7595 regarding Kratom consumer protection. So, Law Manager Edwards.
This is the second year in a row we've been back to talk about Kratom. It is a plant. It's a plant. Very much like turmeric. It is used widely throughout the United States, in many states other than places like Alabama, Arkansas, or Tennessee. So Rhode Island has found itself in a very peculiar grouping of states, because the vast majority of the other states in the country recognize it for its value. They recognize it as a supplement, which this legislation would make it. It would be regulated like a supplement. The Department of Health, throughout the pandemic, did a great job. They really made Rhode Island shine. They followed the science every single day. We had reports a couple times a week from Dr. Alexander Scott, and now we find ourselves with like an herb that is being banned from Rhode Island because the Rhode Island Department of Health is not following the science. We can get you this. This is the science right here. It's all about Kratom. It's all about how the beneficial uses of Kratom, how people use it to get off of opioids, how people use it to relax, how people use it sometimes to not be depressed. People use it in varying amounts, but no one has been certified to have died ever from a Kratom overdose. People die every single day across this country from opioids. People die from all kinds of medicinal overdose. Kratom, again, is a supplement. People aren't going to die from a supplement. If you wanted to physically eat enough of this, it is bitter. It would take more than you could probably humanly consume to be able to actually overdose on this.
Well, actually, you would probably not overdose. You'd throw up because of the substance. That's how much you would have to ingest of this for that to happen.
This is sold in our neighboring states. You can go right across the border and get it. This is not like cannabis, which is sold in our neighboring states right across the street from my district, and you can't get it in Rhode Island. This is the same deal, except that cannabis is scheduled by the United States government. You can't drive on the Navy base, you can't go to any federal facility, you can't do anything with cannabis. And yet, here in Rhode Island, we're going to make cannabis an adult recreational product. And Kratom has no hallucinogenic traits. You can't overdose on it. It's something that should be regulated like an herb, like a supplement. It's like something you would go to, what is it?
GNC.
GNC. You go to GNC and buy. That's what type of product this is. You're not going to have to go to a special store where you're going to have to pull out your license and prove that you're an adult and get your cannabis. This is a very straightforward product. We have people who will testify after us who are much more learned in it. One of them has actually even been to where they grow this product. And we have a doctor, correct? We have a doctor who will be talking about the medicine and the medical aspects of Kratom. So at that, I know you have a very busy schedule, Chairman. I can go through my other bills just as quickly.
Yeah, we'll go through your bills in a moment.
Okay.
So Chairman, I'm just going to add very quickly to this. So I guess the best way to refer to this, it's a nutraceutical. Kratom powder, it's been around for probably close to 1,000 years. It's grown in the rich ecological paradises of Southeast Asia, and the leaves of the kratom tree are packed with naturally occurring alkaloids, which deliver an assortment of vitality-boosting effects. They provides lifting energy naturally, it calms the nerves, it achieves a state, focusing on concentration, it helps to relieve pain and body aches, helps to lower blood pressure, it eases the symptoms of depression. Many people in Rhode Island are utilizing this product, even though it's been banned in the state of Rhode Island. I will tell you, just prior to this meeting, at 2:30, we met with Dr. McDonald on this. 2 years ago, we had a meeting then with Dr. Nicole Alexandra Scott. Our purpose, we provided him with this binder of material, which he has told us he is going to read and take his time to digest, and then we're going to follow up with him. But I did bring that, as we concluded the meeting today, I brought up the fact that we are looking at the issue of recreational marijuana. Recreational marijuana at the federal level is banned. You can't, any of these marijuana shops, you're not allowed to do financial transactions and things such as that because it is federally banned. And yet we're going to make it legal in the state of Rhode Island. And yet Kratom is not banned at the federal level. It is allowed in 44 states, just 6 states, Rhode Island being amongst them. It's illegal to use it because the state chose to ban it and relied on flawed information that was provided to them back in 2017 and has done nothing to address it since. Dr. McDonald, I think after the presentation, he basically said, you've provided me with some new information. There's new studies that he's never seen before. So he's going to take a look at this. But I hope you'll take a look at this. And if you'd like to try a sample, you know, here it is. This is the actual product that is available.
It's not even scheduled by the federal government.
Thank you. Correct me if I'm wrong, this is already legal in Massachusetts as well as Connecticut?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
The only other state in New England that doesn't allow it is Vermont.
Okay, so Rhode Island's one of the last states that
One
are
of the
in those
last
particular
6.
categories.
So basically, Alabama, Arkansas,
Tennessee.
Indiana, Tennessee, Wisconsin, Vermont. So Rhode Island is among the 6 states that you cannot do this.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the witnesses? Seeing none, thank you. Floor Manager Edwards, I noticed that you do have, you withdrew 7842, is that correct?
That's correct, Chairman. That
I have 2 other bills on the
Redundant.
calendar, 7605 as well as 7843. Would you like to introduce any of those?
which-
Whip Chippendale was
yeah,
petitioned.
Whip Chippendale is going to introduce the one that deals with the hoisting engineers.
Okay, so 7843, would you like to introduce that one?
Yes,
Amending the prompt payment?
Prompt payment. That, I have discussed this with the AGC. They have one condition. They'd like to have it go from 7 days to 10, 5 days to 10 days. I have no issue with that. It's someone who works for the general contractor. I think that's a very reasonable request, and with that, I could easily amend the bill.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions for the sponsor on that bill? Seeing none? Thank you. We're going to go to the witnesses on House Bill 7595. So the first up, we have Mack Haddow. Welcome.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you. I'm a senior fellow on public policy with the American Kratom Association. I can tell you that there are 11 to 15 million Americans who use Kratom on a regular basis. About a third of them use it for that morning pick-me-up and increased focus. Another third use it, as Representative Edwards pointed out, for enhanced mood and to actually fight the symptoms.
Is the red button up? There you go.
How's that? Okay, sorry.
Hear you now.
And about a third of them then use it for enhancing their mood and fighting depression, symptoms of depression. And then another third use it in order to help them to wean off of opioids or to manage acute and chronic pain. The evidence that has emerged since 2017 when Rhode Island joined 5 other states in banning kratom at the behest of the FDA. The new science demonstrates that the safety profile and the addiction liability of kratom is within the boundaries and sufficient for what every other state in the union other than those 6 recognizes, is that kratom can be sold as a dietary supplement and is legal federally under the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act as a dietary supplement under what's called Section 201 FF1 of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. The important thing for you to know is that the science absolutely documents that the safety of this product is sufficient for informed consumer consent. This bill will simply require, and this is the most important thing that we share with the Department of Health here in Rhode Island, we want to make sure that consumers are kept safe. There are bad actors in this space that are adulterating kratom products with dangerous substances for their economic advantage. They do so in order to enhance sales, and you buy a kratom product and you think you're getting the pure plant product. And instead it's spiked with things like cocaine, buprenorphine, heroin, and fentanyl. And you feel that surge, the euphoria that is the signature of an opioid. And that's where the problem comes in. You will hear people report, and you've seen some emails, as I understand it, from people who claim to have died from kratom. The science is clear on this issue as well. Every single death has been investigated by the Centers for Disease Control, and the FDA has just acknowledged within this past week that these are adulterated products or polydrug use. They are not from kratom exclusively. The natural plant doesn't have the safety profile that will end up killing you. So we urge you to look at the science. We'll circulate all of the materials that we gave to the Department of Health today to you so you can see the scientific basis for this, and you will draw the same conclusion that today the Department of Health and Human Services has drawn, which is it's a safe product, that it's not killing people. The National Institute on Drug Abuse has concluded, and they're investing $30 million of our money in research on kratom, and that scientific research is showing it meets that safety profile and helps people. And the U.S. Congress has said that you should not ban kratom at the federal level, and you should allow for people to have access to it. And most recently, the World Health Organization Drug Dependence Committee evaluated kratom. All of the evidence that you have seen from the Department of Health and from others that say that kratom is somehow dangerous, they evaluated all of that, and 12 of the leading scientists in the world evaluated all that evidence and determined on December 1st of 2021 there was insufficient evidence to proceed with the scheduling of kratom internationally. There is insufficient evidence for kratom to be banned in the state of Rhode Island today. It is old, outdated science, and it deprives citizens of the benefits of kratom products to help them wean off of opioids. I'll leave with this. Johns Hopkins University looked at adult kratom users who were using it for the purpose of weaning off of opioids. 87% reported relief from withdrawal symptoms. 35% were opioid-free within a year using kratom to replace opioids. That's the safety profile and the harm reduction profile of kratom. We hope you'll pass this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Are there any questions for the witness? Seeing none, thank you very much. I see we have Senator Kurt Bramble over here, and also we have Senator David Carlucci. Would you both like to come up to the microphone? Welcome to the Rhode Island House of Representatives. Happy to have you here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is this live? Yeah. There we go.
There you go.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. It's a privilege to be here today. I'm here because I had the privilege of actually sponsoring and passing the first Kratom Consumer Protection Act in the United States. My background, I'm a CPA by profession. My wife and I have been married 45 years. We have 6 children. One of our children, our middle daughter, when she was in high school, she and her high school sweetheart got caught up in pain medication. They're both athletes. Matter of fact, her boyfriend, who became her husband, our son-in-law, was one of the top football recruits in the nation. But they both injured themselves during high school. Prescription pain meds led to prescription abuse, led to drug abuse, led to heroin, led to jail. Our son-in-law, unfortunately, passed away. Well, drugs got in the way during their time in jail. They divorced. Our son-in-law passed away from an opioid overdose. Had I known about kratom, and Representative Kennedy has spent time in our home. He knows my daughter. He knows our family history. Had I known about kratom, it could have changed the trajectory that my own daughter and her sweetheart were on. I was first introduced to Kratom at a National Conference of State Legislatures meeting in Washington, D.C. in 2018. And I'm a skeptic. I'm not a fan of drugs. I'm not a fan necessarily of recreational marijuana. Brian could tell you, Representative Kennedy could tell you that I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't do drugs. But I was presented with a compelling argument. The American Kratom Association, through Mack Haddow, introduced me to it and said, here's the problem with Kratom. It's been adulterated. It's been adulterated with fentanyl, with morphine, with benzodiazepine, with tramadol, and people are dying. We need to have a regulatory structure. I say each of you have a bottle of water on your desk. If you pick up that bottle of water, it has to be independently lab tested. It's labeled. The ingredients of that bottle of water are required by the Food and Drug Administration to be readily available for a consumer. But there's nothing like that for Kratom. And so he petitioned me to consider running the legislation in Utah. We did. We passed it. It's been in place now for 3 years. There's been a lot of talk about public safety and what happens because Kratom, people are dying from taking Kratom. People are driving under the influence. Well, the science would tell you that Kratom, there is no euphoric high, there is no mental impairment, there is no respiratory depression. It doesn't meet the factors, the 8-factor analysis of what a narcotic is, and yet people, let me read a very brief, I got this email soon after we passed the Kratom Consumer Protection Act in Utah. This is just, I was actually given a promotion, and as representatives, you'll understand, since I serve in the Senate. Representative Bramble, I understand that you have been supportive of some legislation around the regulation and legal parameters around Kratom. Thank you for being willing to be informed and stand up to Big Pharma. I was on prescription opioids for over 5 years, completely dependent from what started out as chronic pain. When I gradually tried to wean myself off, but when I eventually stopped completely, the withdrawal symptoms were absolutely unbearable. Kratom allowed me to continue my efforts to be completely free of opioids. I haven't taken an opioid pill for over 2 years. What a blessing. Kratom saved my life. I could read another email. My House sponsor in Utah, we do legislation just a little bit differently. We have a Senate bill, maintains its designation as a Senate bill, and after it moves out of the Senate, it's still a Senate bill when it's presented in the House, but you need to have a House sponsor of your Senate legislation. My House sponsor helped get the bill passed. His wife is a registered nurse, a cancer survivor. She had breast cancer. The chemotherapy and the radiation caused irreversible nerve damage. She has a chronic pain situation where it's just absolutely debilitating. About 1.5 years ago, Representative Daw came to me and said, Kurt, my wife has been a skeptic. She didn't believe in Kratom. It's not a matter of belief. She's very scientific, very clinical, but she's at the end of her rope. She doesn't know what to do. Do you have any Kratom that I could give her? Well, as the chairman said, one of us here has been deep in the jungles of Borneo. I've traveled to Borneo, to Indonesia a couple of times. I've been deep in the jungles of Borneo where Kratom is harvested. I've wanted to do my own due diligence and see how it's harvested from seed to sale, what happens with it, right? And doing that, I had some Kratom samples that I had been provided. So I gave them to Representative Daw. His wife very carefully measured out a precise quantity. She took the Kratom, again, being skeptical for this was a year after the bill passed, or 1.5 years after it passed, but she was at the end of her rope. So she tried Kratom. And in her own notes, she said that after about 10 or 15 or 20 minutes, the pain went from a 9 or a 10, absolutely debilitating, to a 1 or a 2. It didn't eliminate the pain completely, but it made it manageable. She said, I felt a little bit of a pick-me-up, like having a Diet Coke or a cup of coffee in the morning, a little bit of a feeling of well-being, an optimism, not a mental impairment, but just a pick-me-up. She said that lasted for 4 hours. She said, I didn't believe anything could help my condition. She said after 4 hours, the pain began to return. About 20 minutes or a half hour later, the pain came back so intense that it was debilitating. She said, but I wasn't willing to take more Kratom. I wanted to make certain that it wasn't just psychosomatic, that it wasn't just my brain playing games. She said after a couple hours, I again measured out a precise quantity of Kratom. I took it, and I experienced the same relief that opioids couldn't give me or hadn't been giving me. Now, 1.5 years or 2 years later, she's become an absolute evangelical preacher for the benefits of Kratom for those that are suffering from pain and are looking for an alternative to opioids. That's been our journey. Why the Kratom Consumer Protection Act? Because bad actors are adulterating this product because it doesn't have the euphoric high, it doesn't have the mental impairment, it doesn't give you the buzz that kids are looking for or that addicts need to feed their habit. And so what happens? The bad actors will adulterate Kratom with active ingredients, prohibited chemicals that give you that buzz. So the Kratom Consumer Protection Act does nothing more than give consumers the confidence to have an independent lab certification that says this product is pure, it's not adulterated, concentrated, or synthesized, independently lab certified, and it's properly labeled when they buy it. With that, Mr. Chair, I turn some time to my colleague.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Bramble. And good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. It's an absolute honor and a privilege to be with you this afternoon. My name's David Carlucci. I serve as the Senior Advisor of External Affairs to the American Kratom Association. And for 10 years, I served as a state senator in New York State and chaired the Addiction Task Force and the Mental Health Committee. And about 5 years ago, in 2017, around the same time that the Rhode Island Department of Health was moving forward in banning Kratom in Rhode Island, I had introduced legislation to ban Kratom in New York State. Relying on the same data at the time that Rhode Island was relying on and the 6 other states that have banned Kratom in the United States. But for me, I had a silver lining. As a state senator and as representatives, you all know that we are very accessible. And so the silver lining for me after I put in the ban bill was that I started to hear from hundreds of people and eventually thousands of residents in New York State that urged me and told me their personal stories and told me about how Kratom turned their life around, that it gave them an opportunity to move away from opioids or other harmful substances. So I heard story after story and then started to get new data and decided that the most important thing was not to ban this, but to regulate it, to make sure that the people that want to consume Kratom can do it safely. Because what we have found is that it's not Kratom that's the problem, it's adulterated Kratom. And that's what is the real situation here, that we believe people are consuming it, whether it's banned or not. And when it is banned, they're going to the black market and they're dealing with unscrupulous retailers and unscrupulous vendors or manufacturers. And that's where the problem occurs. So now I'm helping the American Kratom Association to tell this story to make sure that we have access to Kratom and that it's done in an appropriate way. So that's why we're very hopeful that you will support the Kratom Consumer Protection Act and make sure that people in Rhode Island that want to consume Kratom can do it safely. So thank you for having us, and we look forward to answering any questions that you have.
Thank you so much.
If there are any questions, we're open.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Are there any questions from the committee for our witnesses? Deputy Speaker Lima.
Hi, and I get a lot of emails, people like this, but I'm just reading from the Mayo Clinic, and they're saying that poison control centers in the United States received 1,800 reports involving use of Kratom from 2011 to 27, including reports of deaths and some serious negative outcomes. So how would you address this report from, I mean, Mayo Clinic's pretty reputable, and they're saying that the negative effects outweigh the benefits.
That is a troubling report from the Mayo Clinic because of their reputation. The problem is, if you drill down on the data that the Mayo Clinic is relying on, it all tacks back to the FDA's research that the Department of Health and Human Services discredited. What's happened with Kratom, I'll give you an example, and this goes directly to the Mayo Clinic. I was on a conference call with the director of the Medical Examiners Association for the state of Idaho. The speaker of Idaho followed me as a president of NCSL. Representative Kennedy is going to be the president of NCSL in, not next year, the following year. Anyhow, we got a call from the Medical Examiners Association. The FDA had contacted him and said, we want any death, we want you to screen for Kratom, and if there's any evidence of Kratom being present, we want you to rule it a Kratom death. When you look at what the FDA has done, this all started with the FDA finding that there were 9 deaths in Sweden, and these were deaths from Kratom users. But when they got the toxicology reports, you found that all 9 deaths were Kratom that had been laced with tramadol, all sold by the same online vendor, and the product was called Krypton. The CDC and FDA then said, well, there's an additional 44 deaths. Every one of those deaths, when you got the actual toxicology reports, you found that it wasn't Kratom, but there was polydrug use, and there were narcotics in significant concentrations. The Mayo Clinic has just taken that information and just parroted it. They've not done their own independent research. We have with us today Dr. Jack Henningfield, who's one of the premier scientists on addiction abuse, who's done the original research with the National Institute of Drug Abuse, who will be following us testifying, and he could answer the issues. But we've seen that with the Mayo Clinic, OnlineMD or MD.com. All of this tacks back to the same misinformation that the Department of Health and Human Services discredited and said that the FDA, when they say it's a Kratom death, the fact that Kratom is present at the time of death does not mean that that's the cause of death, and you can't determine the cause of death without doing a full screening of toxicology and an analysis. And in every case where we've gotten the actual medical reports, there's not been one example, and Dr. Henningfield can reiterate this, we're not aware of one example worldwide where Kratom was a sole substance at the time of death that could have been the cause of death. And I understand that was one of the concerns. And so since we introduced the Kratom Consumer Protection Act in Utah, we've asked our Department of Public Safety to do a deep dive on do we have any evidence of any deaths. And our Department of Agriculture, that is the repository for the certifications of each product that has to be registered with the lab certifications. And we have found absolutely no evidence of Kratom causing any deaths at any point before or after we passed the Kratom Consumer Protection Act. So the report from the Mayo Clinic is highly skeptical based on what the actual data that we've researched.
Thank you. Are there any additional questions? Speaker Pro Tem Kennedy.
Yes. Senator Bramble, since Utah was the first state that passed the Kratom Consumer Protection Act, one of the questions that came up today during the visit with the Department of Health and Dr. McDonald was, are we looking to create some type of new structure in the state of Rhode Island from a regulatory standpoint in order to address this, similar to the recreational marijuana issue? How has Utah handled this?
Well,
and hopefully this will also address that. So if Dr. McDonald is watching, it'll be one more opportunity to explain that we're not creating a whole new structure here.
Well, we are not creating a whole new structure. As a matter of fact, marijuana is unique because marijuana is scheduled. It is illegal nationally, and states have to jump through some creative workarounds because of federal law. What we've done with Kratom is really straightforward. It's like many products that our Department of Agriculture administers or has oversight over. We require Kratom vendors, Kratom manufacturers, that the product's going to be sold in Utah. The product simply has to be registered, and the Department of Agriculture is a repository for a certificate of analysis from an independent lab attesting to what the composition of the product is. And then we have some standards for what the labeling has to be. Again, pick up the bottle of water and look at the labeling on that. Look at the batch on every bottle of water. There will be a batch number that you can track back if that water happens to be contaminated with anything. We have recall. You hear about recalls regularly. That's done typically through Department of Agriculture's through food product registration. And that's really the system that we've implemented in Utah. It hasn't been a drain on our state budget because the cost of registering the products pays for the cost of the industry itself. When they pay the registration fee, covers the cost of maintaining the registration and the certifications on file.
And then within this whole structure, has the fact that Kratom is legal in the state of Utah, has it resulted in issues in which individuals who are on Kratom have needed to address a new need now to get treatment to get off of Kratom, because that's another thing that the Department of Health, which I think it's incorrect in the letter that was sent to the committee members, but the Department of Health was wondering about, would funding be needed to address the treatment needs of Rhode Islanders who become addicted to this drug, as it's referred to, not as a supplement, but as a drug, as well as funding for public health prevention and surveillance that targets vulnerable populations, but not limited to include pregnant women, youth, and individuals with substance use disorders. We've already heard that this has helped people to get off of opioids, but have you found any issues so far in Utah since the adoption of the Kratom Consumer Protection Act where this has caused problems?
The simple answer is no. Keep in mind, Kratom was legal before we passed the Kratom Consumer Protection Act, so there were no barriers, there was no regulation, there was no structure ever in the state of Utah, nor is there in 44 states. And it's simply not accurate to say that there is this addiction problem in Rhode Island from Kratom, but it wouldn't be there in 44 states. Okay, so the answer is no. We have not seen that, but I will tell you, in my own travels, interacting with the ministers of health and agriculture and exports and trade and whatever in Indonesia, and having done a deep dive on this, Kratom does create for some users a dependency about like caffeine. Now, in Utah, we joke and we say we take our caffeine cold because members of the LDS faith don't drink coffee, but they'll drink Diet Coke, okay? Have you ever known anyone that if they don't get a Diet Coke, they're a little bit irritable and... Come on, I've weaned myself. No, but seriously, someone that doesn't get their cup of coffee in the morning or doesn't have a Diet Coke or whatever, if they don't get a cup of coffee or that Diet Coke, they may have a little bit of a caffeine headache for a day or two. The worst case that I've heard anecdotally in my travels and deep dive that I've done intensely over the last 3 years is that the dependency on Kratom is about comparable to what you would find with caffeine. But no, we've not seen any evidence of withdrawals, of needing to create a whole new regimen with our Department of Health to cure withdrawals from Kratom. And it's not a matter of trading withdrawal from opioids to withdrawal from Kratom. As a matter of fact, all the science says that there is a mild dependency that lasts a few days or maybe a week, similar to caffeine. And it's not anywhere near nicotine or heroin or any of the other types of things that are highly addictive.
Thank you. Whip Chippendale.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator, welcome. Thank you. When the Beehive State regulated and adopted your law regarding Kratom and all the aspects of it, was there an element of taxation on the importers, the distributors, the manufacturers, if there were manufacturers, the resellers, and or the consumers?
Well, Kratom in Utah is treated as any other nutraceutical for sales tax purposes. The only fees that were imposed are imposed on the registration of the product. And the way we do it in Utah, we make it a zero-sum game. We authorize the Department of Agriculture to set the fees such that the program will be self-sustaining. In other words, it's not a revenue source for the state, and it's not a drain. It's not ends up not being an expense for the state. So we require them to in the appropriations process, we require them, their fiscal folks, to analyze what do they expect their actual costs to be, the FTEs and such, to administer the program. How many products do they anticipate will be registered, set the fees so that it will be self-funding. But other than that, there was no other tax. This was not intended to be a revenue source or whatever. Our whole objective was to provide confidence to the consumer that what they're buying, they have confidence that it's not being laced with fentanyl or tramadol or benzodiazepine or morphine or whatever.
So it's a net zero game.
It's a net zero game.
Thank you.
And we rely on the Department of Agriculture. We authorize them to have that. If they find that they've been a little bit under, in other words, at the end of the year when they do their reconciliation, they may raise their fees nominally, they may lower them nominally, but it's intended to simply be self-funding.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Are there any other? Representative Fenfong.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I apologize if I missed this earlier in your testimony, but does Kratom show up in a 12-panel drug test that people would normally do for pre-employment screens?
No, you have to specially screen for kratom. An interesting sidebar on that, because Wisconsin is one of the states that bans kratom. And I was testifying in a committee a couple of months ago in Wisconsin, and their law enforcement is adamantly opposed to kratom based on the information from the FDA. So the head of their sheriff's association testified that they know that there are deaths with kratom. They know that there's operating while intoxicated. OWI is what they call it in Wisconsin. He knows that that's happening, but that their toxicology lab has not been screening for it, so he couldn't give the numbers. What's interesting about that testimony, and this is like this testimony, if I misrepresent here, I think you have laws against providing false testimony in a committee like we have in Utah. So the head of the sheriff's department gave this testimony. Immediately following him was the director of their toxicology lab. And that director testified a little bit differently and said, members of the committee, since kratom was banned in Wisconsin, it became a controlled substance. We have been screening for kratom from the day that it was banned in Wisconsin, and we've not found one incident in Wisconsin where kratom was a sole compound present at the time of operating while intoxicated. We've not found one death associated with it. And in Wisconsin, they screen every DUI. They began screening when it became illegal. In Utah, we began screening when we adopted the Kratom Consumer Protection Act because we wanted to get hard data. Our Department of Public Safety will tell you today, in the 3 years that it's been in place, there have been several thousand traffic accidents, several thousand DUI arrests. There have been a number of traffic deaths, and not one where kratom has been present as the sole compound. And in those where kratom was present, where there was a fatality or a DUI, in Utah we call it driving under the influence, not operating while intoxicated. In every case, there was alcohol or high concentrations of other known debilitating drugs.
I appreciate that. In Rhode Island here, we're pretty dependent on the defense industry. So obviously, as we're
This would
considering
not
different
screen like marijuana.
Okay, that was kind of my question. Has there ever been like in all these other states, safety sensitive jobs where they're saying you cannot be on this or what, stuff like that?
You're dependent on the military here. We have Hill Air Force Base. We have the Dugway Proving Ground. We have the military in Utah is a very big part of our economy. And we have the same issue with the Air Force Base and with the tests. We have the bombing range and the Dugway Proving Grounds and Hill Air Force Base and such. So we'd have that same issue, and it's not a problem.
I appreciate that clarification. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for your
Thank you, Mr.
testimony,
Chair.
and have a safe travels back. Next, we have Jack Henningfield as well as Michael Overstreet. And while you guys are coming up to the microphone, Representative Casey, would you like your votes recorded in the affirmative?
Yes, please.
So ordered. I know there is Representative O'Brien, so ordered.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who needs their votes recorded?
Me as well, Mr. Chairman, please.
Representative Potter, so ordered.
Thank you.
All right, thanks. So we'll go to the witnesses. We'll start off with Jack.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Jack Henningfield, Vice President of Research and Health Policy and Abuse Liability at Pinney Associates and Adjunct Professor of Behavioral Biology at the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. I've been doing research on drugs of abuse, developing medicine since the early 1970s at Johns Hopkins and the National Institute on Drug Abuse, where I headed the lab that did a lot of the abuse potential work and worked with DEA and FDA on drug scheduling. I've contributed to the development and approval of most of the treatment drugs that are used in addiction today, and that's by disclosure, and I'm proud of that. But many of those drugs are not acceptable, accessible, effective, or tolerable to a lot of people. So what do we do for them? We can't, it rings hollow to say just get into a buprenorphine treatment clinic. Also, safety, and we've been talking about safety, and risks is not an absolute thing, it's relative. Methadone, for example, had 3,500 roughly deaths associated with methadone in 2020. Buprenorphine, the magic drug I was working on in 1980, about 900. Those are FDA-approved treatment drugs. They're life-saving, but they also carry risks. The The worst estimates of kratom are far, far lower in risk of death. And in this compilation of some recent studies, including some in the last couple of months, there are estimates of the death risks of kratom, which are at least 1,000 times less than opioids. I'd like to follow up very quickly on a couple of things that Senator Bramble commented on. I think he's a closet pharmacologist, and if you've got a tape of what he said, it's a really nice summary. Also in here is Dr. Gior, the former Assistant Secretary of Health, his letter on why the department rescinded scheduling kratom. And it overlaps very nicely with Senator Bramble's comments. Senator Bramble commented on the forensic issues that was raised. In here is also a summary of one of the certified world-leading forensic toxicologists, the only woman recognized in the top 10, one of my former colleagues at NIDA, Dr. Marilyn Hustis. And you might look at her summary, which again puts some facts and figures. You also mentioned Mayo Clinic. I have to comment on that, don't you know, because I grew up in Minnesota. I might lose my Minnesota citizenship by what I'll tell you, but I talked to the people at Mayo Clinic about 5 years ago, and they were outdated at that time. They were following early comments by FDA in 2015 and 16, and I thought as the research started getting published, they would follow it. I can't explain them, but they haven't. They haven't kept up the research. They're out of step with NIDA. They're out of step with the World Health Organization. They're out of step with DEA. DEA has never listed kratom in its annual drug threat reports. Now, it talks about kratom as a substance of concern. I mean, just about everything is of concern to DEA. But look at the annual drug threat reports. It's not there. A couple of other points. In opposition to kratom, sometimes it's talked about it not being approved as safe and effective. And by the standard, which is FDA approval, that's true. And that claim should not be made. And it shouldn't be made for dietary substances. It's listed in FDA, it's in the law as the botanical and dietary products. And that means it's legal every place except where it's been actually singled out and banned. Otherwise we wouldn't be here today, it wouldn't be legal. But the bill will make sure that false claims of safety and false claims for benefits are not made, and that's really important. Another point, research. Research has been skyrocketing. I'm proud of my old institute, NIDA, which is pouring more than $30 million of research into kratom because it has a lot of fascinating aspects of it. It could lead to new medicines that are breakthroughs based on its substances. But that's 10 years off. 10 years and billions of dollars. That's not going to help any people in the near term. Why did Dr. Gior, who was head of the Assistant Secretary of Health in the last administration, rescind the Department of Health and Human Service kratom regulation to put it in Schedule 1? And in brief, he looked at the evidence for the science and the public health benefits of having kratom available as a pipeline away from opioids, and the concerns that with kratom being restricted, it would be a pipeline back to opioids for a lot of people that were using kratom. And his letter is in this as well, and it really bears reading. The department worked on that, and they did a really good job at looking at it. They're very much in line with now the World Health Organization position. And in fact, he stated in the letter that credible scientists disagree on whether there actually has been a kratom-caused death as opposed to associated. That doesn't mean kratom has no risks, and I think regulation can reduce the risks that are associated with kratom. Nature basically got it right. The balance of alkaloids in kratom is pretty low in toxicity, and does provide a lot of people benefits that have been reported in scientific study after scientific study. But what What is a problem is when it's adulterated, when it's contaminated, and that happens in any industry. And what is really scary is that fentanyl is popping up in just about everything. A couple of weeks ago, New York Times reported, I think, 8 West Point cadets
Yes, it was
that
in West Point.
overdosed on fentanyl-tainted cocaine. It's popping up everywhere. You can help protect the 50,000 or so people that are using kratom in Rhode Island by letting them know that when they go to the store, they can be assured that there's oversight, there's not false claims, it's not adulterated, and so forth. The opioid epidemic, I just want to finish there. As you have heard, kratom is a pipeline away from opioids for thousands of people. That was something that has been documented in survey after survey, and Dr. Gior mentioned it in the rescission letter, and it was mentioned by the World Health Organization. So it's a pipeline away from opioids, not to opioids. And what I think is in the interest of the people that are using kratom is give them the reassurance that what they're buying has the same oversight as water, as Senator, as Senator Bramble mentioned, or dog food or other products. Make sure that there aren't false claims. I think that will be helping the citizens. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Are there any questions for Jack? Seeing none, thank you. Last witness is Michael.
Hi, thank you. So I'm a Kratom consumer advocate. I also have a podcast called The Kratom Guy Show, where we talk about Kratom news and current events, harm reduction, often have influential doctors come on to talk about it. I did have a psychologist, Dr. Mark Swager, who he talks about how there hasn't been one proven case. They looked at the data, and there hasn't been a proven case of kratom causing psychosis, which is an often claim. I do take it every day, and I was severely addicted to opiates and then stuck on Suboxone for over 6 years, which helped me a lot at the beginning. But if you don't know about it, I can tell you from years of experience, the medicine's disgusting. It's laced with artificial sweeteners, flavors, preservatives, and FDA just quietly released that it destroys your teeth. And I didn't realize how negatively I was being affected by that medicine until I got off of it, where I was able to basically feel emotions again, that all of a sudden, like, stuff that I enjoyed doing prior, listening to music or cooking or spending time with my family, was enjoyable again. And I've heard this from many people who have come off Suboxones, that they felt like a shell of their former selves, or almost like a gray cloud got lifted when they came off Suboxone. So the fact that that's the gold standard of treatment is kind of appalling. But I do want to touch on a few things, and I'll try to be brief. The big claim is that kratom acts on the opioid receptors, so therefore is an opiate. It's not an opiate. It's classified as an opioid because it touches on those receptors, but it's very different. It's not a full agonist. It's a biased partial agonist, which, getting a little scientific, but it means that it operates on very specific G proteins. It's not able to light up that full receptor. So it's kind of like, I heard Dr. Andrew Krugel from Columbia describe it as a dimmer switch. So it kind of just turns it on a little bit, but it doesn't have the ability to turn it all the way on as a traditional opiate, which is morphine derived or opium derived. And that's when you start getting into the deadly side effects of opiates, which you're not seeing with kratom. There's never been one death in the origin countries, which is, we're starting to see all these deaths or related deaths in America. So I just don't see how it's possible for us to say that all the foreigner coroners or medical examiners are wrong, and everyone in the U.S. coroners or medical examiners are correct, saying that there's deaths. And I know a lot of them are seeing kratom in the postmortem blood test, and then they're just calling it kratom-related death or acute mitragine toxicity. the original 44 deaths that the FDA claims that the Mayo Clinic is going on, in those deaths have been picked apart. There's a murder by gunshot wound to the chest, suicide by hanging. There's 9 deaths in Sweden with the tramadol synthetic. One guy fell out of a window, broken arm, leg, was on drugs and alcohol, refused medical treatment. That's counted as a kratom-related death. And we're seeing the vast majority, if not all of them, are drugs, alcohol, underlying health conditions. The CDC claims 91 deaths, and 7 only are kratom only. But the next sentence is other drugs can't be ruled out. And the reason why they can't be rolled out, the New England Journal of Medicine, very important paper to all of this, they researched 15 kratom deaths, they did more extensive blood tests and found that only 4 of them were mitragine only. And out of those 4, they found out that there was 3 that were clearly other drugs, and then the number 4th, there was no residual blood. And the reason that is a lot of the coroners and medical examiners are using tests that are very limited. So they ran further, more extensive tests, performing comprehensive toxicology screenings with high-performance liquid chromatography with tandem mass spectrometry, and they found out that all the deaths had other drugs in their system. And the poison control numbers, the poison control calls that Representative Lima talked about, it's important to put that in perspective. There's 1,800 between 2011 to 2017. Now, you look at poison control data just from 2019, there was 109,465 that were related to cosmetics and personal care, and over 100,000 due to cleaning products. So that's just 1 year. We're talking 6 years for kratom. But what we found out too is that is incomplete, inaccurate, and unverifiable information. There's no follow-up at all. So I think that's important to put in perspective. And I've helped over, it has to be over hundreds, at least 100 different people. I used to sell it, which I don't anymore, but to get off of opiates. And every drug that you can possibly think of, people getting off of them, people leading happier, healthier lives. I have people that are going from halfway houses to sober houses, to getting their own apartments, to buying their own places, having no vehicles, to taking the bus and then buying vehicles, and people really just turning their lives around. And I can say that my in-laws both take it, my in-laws take it as well, and they took it for knee surgeries, very limited before and after, and then they don't take it anymore. And one of the states that it's banned is Alabama. She's not able to take it anymore since she moved there, which she's really disappointed about. So I do really support the Kratom Consumer Protection Act. We know that the war on drugs has been a complete and utter failure, and there's no reason to expand it with having Kratom Schedule 1. I mean, the amount that I have in my house right now, I could be kingpin status and being raided by the state police. I am in Boston, so I don't have that. I'm not incriminating myself right here.
Thank
so
you.
It's important. So thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the witness? Speaker Pro Tem Kennedy. And we
Just
do
very
have
quickly, regarding this and the fact that you used to sell it, earlier in the hearing, Floor Manager Edwards held up the box which had small capsules of the kratom within it, and that was pure kratom. What could you explain to the members of the committee some of the different varieties of kratom? For example, I assume some of it can be sold as tea, so that you can have medicinal tea. Some of it is in the form of those capsules. Some of it, I suppose, could be sold in the form of the pure leaf if they wanted to take and pound that or dry it and pound it. So could you just explain very quickly what some of those different things are?
Thank you. It does come in a whole different types of forms, and the majority is in kratom powder. So it's a leaf dried out and then milled into powder. There's crushed leaf, they make it into tea. I take it every day, just mix the powder with a little bit of water and take it. There are pills, and now there's gum and different extracts, and so that's pretty much it. The extracts are just the condensed version of it.
And taste-wise, bitter?
Taste is terrible. I say it's like one of the worst drugs to try to get high from, or worst substance, because I don't really consider it a drug. Worst substance to try to get high from. I've taken way too much on numerous times, and I do have that little. I was an opiate addict for years, so taking too much, it's like I need a snack and a nap, and then I'm good. Like a couple hours later. I've never heard of anybody overdosing on it, and I'm very familiar with opioid overdoses. That the look they get, the complete relaxed vocal cords, and I've never seen it cross over from to addiction. It is physically dependent. It's related to the coffee plant, and it does touch on those opioid receptors. I do take breaks normally, and it's nowhere near as a traditional opiate, and it's very bitter.
All right. Representative Shawcross-Smith.
Yes, you said you take it every day.
I do, yeah.
And what do you think of the cost is it per day to take it?
It's really cheap. It's
What's really cheap?
I mean, I can probably buy a kilo for $100. Last me a month.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much for your testimony. And we have received opposition from the Department of Health, but I would recommend everybody to continue to work together, and maybe we can get something. So that concludes the hearing on this bill.